YouTube channel. We just put up a finishing video today. So, how many of you guys spray nitro? Okay, how many guys would like to spray nitro? Okay, now, the best thing I can tell you about spraying, you have the product, you have the process, and you have technique. Now, what I mean by that is, if you don't get things prepped properly to start, you're running that mistake through the whole thing. Now this, if you look at this, you have 1, 2, and 3. This is a seal coat. Now, a lot of lacquer manufacturers use what they call a spray vinyl. I stopped using spray vinyl. I went back to shellac. And when I'm talking about shellac, I'm talking about shellac flakes. And I take my shellac flakes and I put them in a coffee grinder and I pulverize it, turn it to dust. I use Everclear and I use a 1 and a 2 pound cut. And to make this easy for you, in 8 ounces of Everclear, 1 ounce is a 1 pound cut, 2 ounces is a 2 pound cut. So does that make it easy? Now please pass this around. This is a seal coat. This is seal with filler. And then this gets kind of buffed off and then it gets sealed again. So you are sealing, filling, and sealing. Now to get it...
What did you say the product was?
Okay, this is shellac and this is going to be... Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is prep your wood. Now when you sand, I think the number one mistake a lot of people do is, I got to sand this real smooth, and you go to a very high grit. Don't go past 220 grit. You need to allow what we call tooth. So, when you sand, always use a sanding block. Now, I'm going to hit this real quick. Sanding grits, you have P grade, C grade, micron grade, K grade. I mean, they have all these different grades. So, using a P grade, which is normal sandpaper that you'll get at Home Depot, and I get my sandpaper from a company called Industrial Abrasives. And I also use TX sandpaper, which I get from Klingspor. Those are my sandpapers of choice. 2 demerits each. Okay, I always use a sanding block. Now, the handiest way to make a sanding block is a piece of MDF or a piece of plywood. And the foam insulation tape that you get for pipes, that gives you a little padding, that works good. And at the dollar store, they have these erasers for making big mistakes. They're great sanding blocks. Now, I will use P grade, I use C grade, and I also use a sticky back paper that I get from Industrial Abrasives, and you can get that in numerous grits. And what's nice about that, you can stick it. You don't have to fold it up and hold it. So, I generally start sanding my product, usually with the sanding block. I'll start at 80 grit, 120, 180, 220. Then I dampen it. I always wet and raise the grain. And when I say wet, I don't mean saturate it. Take a wet paper towel or a spray bottle and then just wipe it off. Let it dry. So get yourself a cup of coffee, make sure it's dry, and you're just cutting the fur. You want to make sure you're as flat as possible. Then you mix your shellac, and I will actually put it on with a paper towel. You can brush it on. You can do whatever you want. Shellac will dry in 15 minutes. So that side is number 1. So when you look at it...
John, when you mentioned Everclear, that's your shellac solvent?
Yeah, Everclear is basically good moonshine. Okay?
You can
95, what the 95%?
Yeah, you can also buy culinary alcohol. There's a place in Maine, and it's fantastic.
Oh, great.
They don't ship to every state. And so when you said 1 ounce or 2 ounces, that was to how much solvent?
To 8 ounce alcohol, 1 ounce is a 1 pound cut, 2 ounces is a 2 pound cut. And I like to use the 1 pound cut first because that will help to seal into the pores of the wood. Once that's dry, you really don't have to scuff it much unless you got lumps and you build it up, and then just lightly scuff it with like a 320 grit. Now I like to use, for my filler, I use what's called aqua coat I used to use a product called PoroPack, but that was such a heavy process and it would take 45 minutes. Aquacoat's drying about 35. And actually read the instructions. We're guys, we generally do it first, screw up, and then we read. But I use a vinyl glove. I'll take the palm of my hand and I rub it in. And if somebody looks on Amazon, look for a 3-inch squeegee. They're about the size of a credit card, and they have a nice rubber pad on them. And then I'll cut it with the grain. You might want to, if it's kind of lumpy, sand it down. I'd give it an hour. Then I put the second coat on, and then I kind of go across the grain a little bit of an angle. You definitely want to get your pores filled the best you can. Then I put a third coat on, and that I usually let sit overnight because I really want to make sure it's good and cured. And that I'm going to flat sand with a 320 grit. And again, all blocks. You don't want to use your fingers because you'll actually, your fingers create pressure points. So always use a block. I don't use the orbital sander often. And if you look really close, I purposely use the orbital sander. You'll actually see these swirl marks come up later in your process. So
Do you tint the aquacoat?
you can. Sometimes I will. Generally, if I stain it, I generally don't. But sometimes if you want that Martin effect, you can mix it up. Jeff Jewett's color tones. Yeah, it mixes really well.
Okay.
And then you can do that. So once I'm done with the sealing, that's number 2 on that side that's going around. That I will sand the next morning. My next coat of sealer, I generally do a little heavier. I generally go to a 2-pound cut and wipe that on. That I let sit for about an hour. I will flat sand that. Then I start my actual spraying process. Now I've used MTech 6000 and I use nitro. At this point, I want to talk about spray guns. Harbor Freight spray guns, they're really nice on the wall, and that's where they should stay. I have a DeVilbiss Shri SRI Pro 250. It's a touch-up gun in the auto industry, and it's perfect because they have a product called a K-Cup. So I can mix whatever I want, infinite amount of number, so I can have different mixes, like if I'm doing a sunburst or whatever, just twist it off and twist it back on. Every time you're done spraying, make sure you run some lacquer thinner, squirt it out so that your gun stays clean for your next coat, because there's nothing worse than having spitting coming out when you're trying to spray. So now that I'm ready to spray, my first coat's a spray, and I'm using ASCO Nobel lacquer. I've used Stumac lacquer. I've used Minwax lacquer. And I used Deft once. Don't use Deft. That's great for furniture. It's not good for guitars. ASCO.
Hey, John, do you ever use the Mohawk?
Yeah, I use Mohawk. I just get ASCO now because I'm a work dealer. Yes?
Sorry for all the questions.
No.
I didn't catch the brand of lacquer you're using.
I'm using the same as Martin. ASCO Nobel. AZKO. ASCO Nobel. I've used Mohawk. I think we all.
Cardinal at
I haven't used that for a long time.
Okay.
And the reason why I'm using it delivers it, and there's no hazmat fee, and I buy it in a 5-gallon can.
And after your second shellac sealer, the 2-pound cut, any scuff sanding after?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you just want to kind of smooth it, knock the high spots down.
Okay.
Okay.
John?
Yes.
If anybody else has had this problem, I was building a guitar and I sanded after that first coat of shellac and then the sealer. And what I found was that the sealer dusts almost microscopically. And if you don't get that cleaned out of there really well,
Yep.
you end up with white specks on your finish.
Well, what I do, and I didn't say this, when I'm all done and ready to do my finishing, I generally wipe down with naphtha. Naphtha is a very good solvent. Cleans it off. Water's fine. The dusting, if you get a lot of dusting, you really want to make sure you clean the dust off. Blow it off, whatever. But wiping it down with naphtha and mineral spirits is fine. Don't use acetone or lacquer thinner to wipe it down and make a mess.
So when you're applying an aquacoat with your palm, you're getting that on the whole surface and the pores.
You're pushing it in.
Yep.
Now with
when you sand, you're taking everything off the surface.
I don't take it all off the surface, I want to flatten it. Aqua coat is really nice because you can spray on top of it and it disappears.
Okay.
The pour pack also was kind of tricky, but then when you sealed on top of it, that kind of hides that.
Okay, so if you're level sanding that and then you burn through in a spot, do you re-hit that spot with your aqua coat?
Okay, well, if that's a good point. If you happen to sand through to a bare spot, hit it again with your shellac. Build it, just basically reverse the process on top of that.
So between your shellac and your burn through and your aqua coat, there's never witness lines necessarily.
No, you won't have witness lines. Now, if you take a look at the half guitar there, I purposely left, there's some, if you look, you're gonna see some glue footprint. So the number one mistake that a lot of guys do when they're prepping, that's where the water comes in. And before you actually do anything, you can wipe it down with acetone or something like that. You want to try to find anywhere where you have glue, swirl marks. Sometimes with wood you get a soft spot and it gets a little fuzzy look at it. So you want to address that as you're going through so you know where you're at. So, there. Now we're ready to spray. Now when I get ready to spray, I have a mixture of my lacquer thinner, and I try to do about a 5% mix of retardant. That's going to be my thinner for my spray. Now with the ASCO, I can thin that 50%. So my first coat, I'm going to have an 8-ounce cup, and that's full. I'm going to spray my first coat. My other lacquer that I have set up to go in there is going to be a 20% mix. So now I have my 50% mix, that went down a little bit, I'm adding 20%. So I'm slowly building up the solids in the finish. I want the lighter finish, so that helps to soak into the pores. And I'm going to give it 3, maybe 4 coats, and I'm going to allow about an hour between coats. And I do not level sand between coats. Now, the big thing that I think that really helped change is there's a guy that used to do finishing for Martin, Dennis Fry. He finished at Martin for 40 years. He retired. And this is a technique he taught me, and I've been doing it ever since. I put what I'm going to call my build coat. Now, when I'm doing my spraying process, I did not do it on here, so that you can get an idea of how much finish you're building. You tape off your finger extension, take 3 or 4 little pieces of masking tape and stick them on there. Now, as you're spraying, after you do 2 or 3 coats, you can pull that piece of tape off and you can mic it and see how much you've built. So you want to build, I generally go for about 6 to 8 thousandths on my first layer.
That's your first.
That's
3
my
or
first 3
4
coats. My first day spray.
What did you say the percent mixes were?
Okay, I'm going to make my thinner mix, and I want to put 5% retardant.
5%.
Okay, then I'm going to mix my lacquer to thinner 50% for my first spray. Now, with Mohawk and Minwax, they're a little bit thinner than the ASCO. So I'd probably tell you do about a 30% with that material. Experiment. That's the best thing I can tell you, because finishing isn't just about the product and the process. There's a big technique factor you know very well. To learn how to build a guitar is easy. To finish it, that's where the money is. Now, I purposely left some of the mistakes. Where's the half a body? Okay. And again, I want to thank Martin for giving me the stuff out of the scrap. All right. One of the big mistakes that I saw on this one, where are you? Or maybe it's on this guy. Okay, there was a glue footprint on here. So, right here, all right? That's because there was glue that you didn't get off. So I purposely want to show you what the beginner mistakes will be. So this, as you can see, sealed and build, finish, coats, and then you're going to see the process. We're going to take it through there. So it's so important to look for the swirl marks, for the glue, and on here on the top, I want to show you something. When you sand, if you aren't careful, gotta look at this real close. There's a soft spot in the lacquer, or in the wood, that's a fuzzy spot. So when you're sanding, you gotta make sure, use the water, so you can read what the surface is doing. Because if your surface isn't prepped, and you well know it, if your prep isn't right, you're gonna fight this all the way through. So, we got our mix, 3 coats. Generally, we were told you gotta spray and let it sit for 2 weeks. This is a build coat. I actually get on it the next day. 320, 400 grit, flat block, and now I'm using a product called, and this is the name of it, Asilex. A-S-S-I-L-E-X, Eagle, what is it? Eagle, yeah. This stuff's expensive, but I want to tell you something, it lasts. And it'll come in a kit, 600, 800, 1,000, 12, and 1,500. Now this is a micron grade, I think. It's a much finer grit. I used to use a product called Micro Mesh. I no longer bother with Micro Mesh. And I learned of this product through, on YouTube, there's a guy called Dallas Auto Detailers. Finishing is about getting that final buff. He's worth watching because he's going to explain all of this, which I'll get into in a minute. So, we sprayed.
Could you say the name again, please?
Asilex, or Dallas. It's either Dallas Detailers or Dallas Auto Detailers.
Or you can spell Asilex.
A-S-S-I-L-E-X.
Yes. Okay.
Okay?
John, how did you, talking about the glue
Yeah.
brace there,
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna take care of that with sandpaper, right?
Well-
Or do you need to hit it with water?
Well, okay. When you're prepping your wood and before you do any finishing, putting the water on, and now if you use guys, I feel like a
You
visible
use-
box. Okay. Avoid tap water, go get distilled water, because you don't want any. Lacquer is a wonderful material, but it's very tricky. You don't want to add any chemical into that you don't need. So if you have well water, you're good. Otherwise, get distilled water. Look really close. Those LED lights are wonderful. I must have a dozen of them over my finish here. Go outside and look. That's what you want to do.
Just a note, you can, from Amazon, you can get little UV flashlights.
Yep.
And type on one glows yellow under ultraviolet. So in a dark room, you can go over with your little UV flashlight, particularly around binding and stuff like that. You can see the little yellow bubbles.
Yep, yep.
Oh, really?
I use a lot of fish glue and hide glue. And when I say hide glue, I'm not talking about the tube stuff. That's junk. I use hot
The
hide glue.
type on glows yellow. Under
That's
UV.
interesting. Thank
And
you.
for UV flashlight is like $6 to $8, and they're great fun to go out in the woods at night.
Okay.
With the UV flashlight.
Right.
And there are centipedes and millipedes out there which grow bright green.
Okay.
So you go out in the woods at night for everything.
That's what I like about this. Somebody's going to give you an idea that you haven't heard before. Okay, so the next day you flat sand. Now you start your spray booth. Now, if you look on YouTube channel, Blues Creek Guitar Spray, I actually have this fixture that I put my guitar body on. It's a barbecue rotisserie motor, a 3/8 inch carriage bolt, and you grind the head off so you keep the square. JB weld, and you weld that thing in. And it's on a piece of plywood about yay long. And I have 2 stands here where the screw comes through. Put a bushing on here because the threads will grind it, so just put something in there. And that will spin at a nice slow rate. Now my spray booth, I have a switch here so I can turn it off so I can spray the sides standing up, rotate it standing up. I have just regular like a McDonald's hot fry lights. And I do have a lacquer heater. If you look on Amazon, there's a product, I think it's called Inkbird, and they are a temperature controller. And you can put a soldering gun into your bucket of water and heat it to like 95 degrees, which is the temperature I like to spray my lacquer at. I also use a hair dryer and the light to warm my body. And when I'm talking warm, I'm just talking that it feels warm. You don't want to make it hot. Body temperature's fine. And I didn't mention that earlier. The heat actually helps to lower the viscosity for a better flow out. And as it's rotating, if you get a run, don't worry about it because that usually flows out through the rotisserie process. So now I'm going to spray, and I'm going to spray coats that I get about another 8 thousandths for my what I'm calling my finish coats. That I will let sit for 2 weeks. Now in my spray booth, I can hang my guitar up. I have a dehumidifier and I have that blowing air onto the bodies, and I'll just let that run for 2 weeks. Now when I start to get into the actual finishing, where's that body at? Okay, I'm using Asilix paper with the blocks. And I'm going to go through the whole grit process. And the other nice thing,
Dry,
huh?
dry.
You can also wet sand with it. And I like to wet sand with it because sometimes you start pilling up dust and you get pills and then you start rubbing burnish marks into your top. With wet sanding, you don't have that. Okay? The Asilix,
Couple questions, John. Do you use water for wet sanding or naphtha?
I use water with a quart of water with a tablespoon of Dawn.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
That's the traditional one. Richard Schneider, back in the 80s, turned me on to using naphtha. And I always found my wet sand paper cloths much less using naphtha than water and soap.
Well, and with the Asilix, what's really nice about that, if it clogs, you take it over to your air compressor and it blows right off.
You take it where and blow it?
Blow it off with the air compressed air.
Oh, okay.
That Asilix paper is just, I can't, it's worth every penny. I mean, we're all cheap, but that is good stuff.
How,
So, going back, you said you spray your first 3 coats at 50/50, and you're looking for a 6,000 to 8,000
Yeah.
bill.
Right.
And then,
And that, let me put it back, that is in what I'm gonna call the green state, so
okay.
as soon as it's
And
dry.
then you mentioned after that you flat sand.
Yeah.
Now, I don't understand how you can flat sand after 3 thin coats without going through the finish.
You are absolutely right. So you have to pay very close attention as you're wet sanding. You're watching, for lack of a better term, the orange peel. No matter how well you seal, you're still going to have a little bit of shrinkage at the pores. So you're going to take, let's call it the build coat down, and you're reading those little dots, for lack of a better term. Now that's where it's really nice with the Asilix. You start sanding with 500, you see you're starting to hit that, jump to the, just work your way through the grits as you see them going less and less. And then when you see that you're almost done, then you're going to go up to the 1500 and just lightly sand it. If you don't get them all out, that's fine because you're not going to be putting build coats on top. The important thing is you got to get those small sink areas filled. You don't have to do that on a spruce top. You don't have to do that on maple. You don't have to do that on cherry. Moutenier, I built that. That doesn't take much for filling either. So
if you're then going to be spraying build coats after that, couple questions. You don't need to get it to 1,500 grit as that stays.
no, as long as you get the reason why I'm telling you to go to 1500, it's better to take a little bit longer time and not sand through than to sand through.
Understood.
Okay.
And then your build coats, are they 50/50 too?
No, my build, well, I'm going to start with a 50/50. Now I'm going to just take my pure lacquer, and as I'm using it, I'm just adding fresh lacquer.
So no thinner at all?
No
You're
thinner.
needing it.
Now, if you feel that the humidity's a little high, you can add a little bit of thinner and a little bit of retarder just to slow down the curing process to give it a chance to flow out.
Okay, and last question is about how many coats do you do for build coats?
Okay, usually I'm going to be doing, if I got a really good flattening job, 3-4 coats is all you need, because you know you have a couple of thousandths of finish on your base coat. So you don't have to put a heck of a lot on there. 3-4 coats is probably all you're going to need. Now, as you know, wood's wood, and sometimes it was nice and flat yesterday, now you have a little sink. And what I'll do if I see I have a little sink in there, I'll hit that, by itself and then let that go around and spray on top of that just to give me a little room to sand down later. But if you can get, I would say, 0.6 on your second finish coats, you got all that you need. Because I think, and I think you might agree with this, most people when you're starting, the two mistakes that you do is A, you don't sand enough, or you sand too much. Now the other thing, as you start building, now you're going to have what I call my body and fender work. So you might have a sink. You might have, here's a little gap that you missed in a piece of binding. If you're doing pearl work, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So now after you do your first spray coat on your finish, look for that. And then drop fill. And if you drop fill it and give it a few minutes before you spray, that helps to blend in so you don't have all these lumps later. They'll actually kind of start blending in. Because if you don't get it built, you aren't going to get it flat.
For drop filling, I always like to take a jar of lacquer, let it evaporate for a couple of days so it gets thicker.
Yep.
And then use that to drop.
I do the same thing, and I get it about the consistency of fingernail polish.
Yeah, exactly.
And when I drop fill, I don't use a brush, I use a toothpick. Because one time I did it with a brush and I ended up having a hair in there. So a toothpick, that's all you need, because you just drop it in there and away you go. Now, if it's a real severe, in fact, if you look at the body, there's on the one side you can see that there was like a, I don't want to call it a crack, but you might have had a vertical pour. That sometimes might take 2 or 3. The deeper it is, the more it takes to fill it up and the more that it shrinks. Now, I did learn that if you let your lacquer sit too long and it gets too thick, it can get a little gummy. So, like he said, maybe 24 hours, 48 hours, and don't think you can keep it forever. So just mix a little, like a baby food jar. That's all you need. Now, you have the spray coats and you let it cure. If you look, I explain on there what I'm doing. If you look at the top, the one side I didn't do anything to. The other side was level sanded and polished. So, once you get everything flat, and here I definitely do the wet sanding, and as he said, naphtha. I know people use mineral spirits. You can use solvents. I don't like
I'm
these.
sorry, I didn't mean minerals.
Yeah, but naphtha does work, although naphtha is not exact. Wear gloves, because you don't want to absorb the chemicals in your skin.
John?
But don't smoke while you're doing it.
When you're talking about going to wet sanding, is that with starting with the 500 or
Yeah.
600 aspects?
Yes.
All the way through?
And then use a squeegee to wipe it off, because you want to pay attention to the surface, because you don't want to sand through at this point. Because if you over sand, the object now is you want to get it flat. All right. So we explained sealing, filling, sealing, what I want to call my base coat, and then my finish coats. Now, I did find that using heat and air, and when I say heat, the heat lamp, we aren't talking hot, we're just talking about warm. My spray booth is 5x7. I have an electric heater in there, and I'll turn that up to like 75, 80 degrees. So that's nice and warm, but airflow is important. Anybody here spray, do you have a spray booth? Right. I made myself a spray booth. The bad things in nitro lacquer are the VOCs. VOCs are heavier than air. There are duct fans that you can get on Amazon, 4-inch, 8-inch. I have a 4-inch fan on a piece of PVC pipe with 3/4-inch holes drilled every 6 inches, and that's on my floor. That's running all the time I'm spraying. I want those VOCs out. I also have an 8-inch fan that I'm using to pull my spray air out. Now, I live in the country, so I'm very lucky. I can spray like crazy, and the rabbits are higher than hell, and I'm fine.
That's spraying outside.
I'm going to tell you a funny story about that. I was building a guitar for an Asia show, and I worked 3rd shift, and I sprayed at night. I went up to the house to get a beer, and when I came back, there must have been 4,328,000 gnats in my lacquer. So If you're gonna spray outside, I think Walmart has a plastic wardrobe that you can hang on the wash line. When you're done spraying, you can zip it and you won't get the bugs on there.
Without bringing it back outside.
You wanna let it outside and vent because you don't wanna bring those fumes in if you can help it. My spray booth with my spray table, I built what is called a maholic. In plain words, I'm creating a low pressure area in my spray booth so that I'm pulling fresh air in and evacuating the bad air. And I'm using an 8-inch HVAC booster fan, which is an induction motor. It doesn't have brushes, so it doesn't spark. I have a sealed storm door, so I can seal that up. It's nice and tight, and and for God's sakes, wear a mask. You can't hold your breath that long, okay? I mean, really, pay attention to the lacquer. It's not helpful. Now, if I'm using M-Tech, the process is basically the same, but I don't have to thin it as much, and it doesn't take as many coats. But the final level sanding, I don't care what finish you do, it's that final level sanding before you get ready to buff. Now, see my time here? Okay, we're doing good. So,
John, is the M-Tech water-based?
it is. There's a water-based, there's a number of I'm going to say non-solvents. Remember when the water finishes first came out, Roger, they had that bluish tinge to it?
Yeah.
M-Tech has done a wonderful job of getting rid of that. The reason why I'm a nitro guy and traditional and it's easy to repair, but that M-Tech is actually pretty darn good. What finishes do you use?
I use nitro,
Okay.
Cardinal lacquer.
Yeah, Cardinal's good stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't use vinyl sealer. I hate vinyl sealer.
I hate vinyl sealer.
Only had major problems with sealing.
Yeah. What do you use?
Except for shellac.
Are you using shellac?
Yeah.
Same thing I'm doing?
Pretty much.
Yeah. I've also used, for a sealer, I've taken lacquer, thinned the living snot out of it and sprayed it. That seemed to have worked, but I like shellac. Shellac is
There's
good.
one good two-part sealer called isolate,
Okay.
which is really, really good. But I'm fine with lacquer.
Well,
With shellac.
and you've been doing this longer than I have, but you got to admit, it's your technique. I mean, you have the basic process, but your technique is the unknown of the factor. Practice. I mean, the guys that spray one guitar a year, take notes. Remember what you do. I actually learned spraying on cardboard. You know, because you can see it coming out. I hit a little bit about a gun. Okay, I also have the, let's see, what's that called? The Semi-Pro, Fuji Semi-Pro sprayer, which is a very good unit. It's affordable. The only thing is you got to break it apart every time you use it. That's where the DeVilbiss and the auto touch-up guns. What gun do you use, Roger?
I like I have a small, like you said, it's a DeVilbiss CGA. It's
Yep.
a touch-up gun, but it's not gravity feed, it's suction feed.
Okay, mine's
I like the weight on the bottom, on the top, and then I have a full size.
And the other thing I want to say is when you set up your gun, to learn how to set up your gun, you have air and solid mix. So I'm using the drop-down HVLPs. So the object is to get the gun to come out and spray that you get a good atomized mist. I use a 1.0 millimeter nozzle. What do you use?
I have no idea.
You use a pointy one. Okay.
I also want to point out the importance of having a dissipant system for your air.
Yep.
Because water and lacquer does not mix. So you can buy these dissipant things where your air line goes into it, comes out of it, and the agents in the dissipant.
Good point. I forgot to mention that. I think the brand I use is called Sharp, S-H-A-R-P-E.
Yeah.
I also have, right off of my air compressor, I have a water and oil separator, and then I go into a Sharp.
Right.
Then I go into my spray booth. I have another oil water separator in there. So, and always make sure you drain your air tanks
All the time.
all the time.
What's your method of application for the shellac? Are you shooting that, brushing it on?
Paper
Wipe
towel.
it on with a paper towel. If you're going to use a brush, you can use a cheap brush, but I find with a brush, 9 times out of 10, you're going to leave a hair in it. The paper towel works, a t-shirt works, you know, the problem with a t-shirt, it can leave lint. I'll take a paper towel, you know the paper towel that you can tear off the size? Okay, take one of them, fold it in half, then I fold it in thirds and I make it 1 inch wide. And then I just stick it on in. I'm done. And
Just reminding you, you have 25 minutes to talk about polishing.
okay, now, we all understand, well, polishing it, now we're gonna get into some stuff. Okay, is there any questions on this?
Just one real quick one, going back to the heating.
Yes?
Would it be possible / advisable to use like a low-powered hair dryer instead of like a heat lamp?
Well, heat lamp's easy. The sad part, if you're spraying and you have an airflow, you're kicking up dust. I use a number of fiberglass air filters that you use for furnaces. So my downdraft table is pulling that in. And don't do this. Don't think next coat you take your air gun and spray stuff. You don't want to disturb your air. That's why I make sure I have that floor. I want my air to come in and come down. Okay. Am I right so far? Okay. Now,
John, I've got a question for you. As you watch videos and read, they talk about the importance of the lacquer mixture and the importance of reducer, but it's all weather and humidity. For those of us who don't have a humidity control shop, I mean, I've got an air conditioner that helps, but I mean, and I live in the South, so we can have 85% humidity. Is there kind of like a chart of some sort that gives you an idea of what your lacquer, thinner, retarder mixture should be based on your conditions?
okay, I have an Avion humidity gauge. That's a laboratory gauge. If you're going to buy a hygrometer, look for one that you can calibrate. And go online, how to calibrate one. There's the wet salt method, whatever. You want to have a way to know what your actual relative humidity is where you're spraying. I do not spray above 55%. I will not spray. So I generally get my RH down to about 45% because you can have blushing problems. Okay, so if you can keep it down at 45% to 50%, you're going to be fine. Okay? Now, if you think that you're going to be a little humid, have a little bit of humidity, add a little more retarder, because that keeps the lacquer from curing and gives the moisture a chance to come out. And there's a product called No Blush, which is basically alcohol. You can spray that on there. That will soften the lacquer enough to let the moisture out.
Well, I guess what I'm asking about is a little more. What's a little more?
Okay, so you go from 5% to maybe 8-10%.
Say that again.
Maybe up to 10%. But don't, when you start playing with retarder, you actually can start creating some problems. So you don't want to over retard it, but if you do have higher humidity, you could probably go up to 10%.
Okay.
Would you agree with that, Roger?
Yeah, again, I don't, if it's humid out, don't spray.
Yeah.
That's simple. If you get any blushing on your very first coat, stop.
Stop.
Retarder, and if you're going towards Sarah Pale, then we'd be very upset with us using the word retarder.
Okay. Now, we're going to assume you all got this part. Like I said, I sound smart. Anyway, now, the buffing process. And the buffing process is what's going to take your finishing to the next level. I used to use, I still do use, my favorite buffing setup is a Shop Fox Arbor on a Harbor Freight. In fact, I think I have a video of that. So I use, and you do not need a lot of horsepower. A friend of mine opened up a shop and he bought one of those Grizzly big buffers. Honest to God, the guy came in with a D45. I got a scratch. Can you buff it out? Yeah, he had a strap. He didn't take the strap off. He was buffing it. Did you ever see a D45 go around like that? So you don't want to do that. Okay, so let's get into buffing. Now, the buffing technique, and this is where the buffing process is where you're using finer and finer abrasives because each layer is taking out the abrasive mark from the previous layer. These are Domet and flannel. I get them from Jess Carr, and I also, Cresswell Plating has them. Now, this is the funny part. I use a 16-inch, I wore this one down. This is 1 1/8 and the shaft is 3/4. I use plumber's solder as my flange to put that on. Now, you also want a rake. A rake, as you know, just kind of looks like a bunch of bandsaw blades. So you want to fluff this out. All right, you can pass them through. I use a 1/4 horsepower motor, and I have that on a hinge, so that's actually giving my tension to the belt. You don't want your buffer to pull the guitar out of your hand, because if you catch a corner, that puppy goes flying, and that's not a good thing. So, okay.
John, which is which?
That's the cotton, that's the flannel.
Okay, that's.
No, this is the Domet, and that's the flannel. The Domet's a little harder.
And you start with the Domet on the.
Yes.
More aggressive.
I start with that one. Now, I use Manzurna dry cakes. What do you use, Roger?
I used to use Missouri, and I used the new one that just goes.
Yeah. With Manzurna, I took a picture of what I used. When you look at Manzurna on the front of the block, it has 1 to 5. I'm using 3, 4, and 5. And the product that I use is, okay, here we go. Manzurna P195, that's my number 3. Oh God, it's clear. I think it's GW86, that's my number 4. And P175 is my number 5, that's called Super Finish. But they basically have what they call medium cut, finish, and super finish.
What's the company name?
Manzurna. Menzerna. That's my cake.
Jess Carr too, right?
That's a Jess Carr
Yeah.
and Amazon. You can find it all over. I like those cakes. Now I will rake, and you'll actually see it build up. Now the trick, when I'm buffing, I take the back of my hand and I just touch it against the wheel. You'll feel when your abrasive is running down. When you're going back and forth and across, you want to see a little dust trail right below you, okay? I generally start working across the grain. Now, where's the buffing wheel at? Okay, all right. Just throw me one. Okay, so when this thing's spinning, and I'm trying to spin, it's not about the RPM, it's about the inch per minute. But in my case, I can tell you, I'm running at about 750 RPM. And then when I'm doing this, I'm hitting like the lower half. Because if you hit a corner, we've all done it, they go flying. So if you're going to do the sides, come at an angle, and you can work. And you're going to watch it as it cuts. Now the first buff with this, it's kind of a, how can I put it? It's a glazy, smeary look, all right? Then that's basically starting to work things down. And you're going to find the shinier it gets, the more the flaws are going to show. Am I wrong? So you have to pay attention to that. So you're starting to go with number 3. Then you go to number 4. It's not a grinder. So when I'm running this, I'm basically coming in about 1 inch. That's all you need. If you start going too hard, what's going to happen, you're going to build up heat. You don't want to build up heat. So constantly be aware how warm it is. Keep it moving. Now the sides aren't that difficult, and when you do the top, I generally work, if you guys want to look at this, I generally work it, and I'm going to work like across the grain, with the grain, at an angle. Vary your angle of attack with your buffing wheel. Now, as you start building up, now you're going to start seeing things like long stand scratches, little drops, little stinks. Take a look at them, and if you think you got to drop fill them again, drop fill it. Because you don't want to start buffing it and then, no, you don't want to finish buff it. Fix it as you go along. If you have to sand with that, I use the rubber eraser at this point, and I'm just working that little area to bring it down. Because when you drop fill and you go to buff, you're going to see that witness line. So you have to allow cure time. No matter what you do, you got to allow cure time.
Are you using one compound per buffer, taking it off your machine?
No.
Or
No.
You're raking it out?
I'm raking it
applying
out.
the next
Yeah.
100?
Now I have the two going. Sometimes, and this is a technique you have to work with, sometimes I'm bouncing back and forth and I might use 3 on both of those buffers. One's being a little bit hoggier. The bigger wheel's a little faster, so I'm a lighter touch and I can build up, well, I'm gonna call it glaze, okay? It'll start getting shiny. Now, when you look at the body here, if you look real close, okay, this is the side that I finished. Now, if you look real close, from here up was done on the buffing wheel. From here down was done with what I call the dual action hand buffer. That's an altogether different ballgame. So you gotta look real close, and it looks pretty good, but when you look at the light, you can see where the shinier it gets, your light is gonna start looking in focus. Would you say that's a good analogy? So if you look up here real close, the fluorescent tube is a little less in focus than down here. So rely on your eye the best you can. Look for the finish flaw, because there's one on here that I purposely left. Yeah, there's a little, like I said, the shinier it gets, the more that stuff comes. Now, the Dallas Auto detail buffers are gonna explain this. Now, I don't know what, do you use one of these, Roger?
I don't.
Okay. Let's see, I remember how to put it down. Yellow, orange, white, blue. Believe it or not, these buffing pads, there's different graining to them. There's a product called Groits, Groits, and they come when you're using the wet buffing compounds. When you look at them, you're going to see a compound, you're going to see a polish, and you're going to see buffing. There's also Minzerna Heavy Cut. I'll start with the heavy cut because if I see a little scratch I want to work down, I can work it down with this. And that will really build that buff coat. You can actually make it, I mean, real shiny. I can generally buff out a guitar in about 4 hours. I don't know how long it takes you, but you probably have much better equipment than I have and a lot more skill. But it takes time.
Oh, a lot of them.
It takes time, and the hardest thing that you have to learn is your technique. I can tell you what I do. It's like riding a bike. You get on it and pump the pedals. Until you get on it and ride the bike, that doesn't mean anything. You have to learn that technique. A good way to learn how to do finishing before you get in the guitar, go get poplar, go get red oak, and get pine. Those 3 different woods, red oak has a lot of pores, so you learn how to fill. Spruce, pine, they actually build up really good. Purposely take it to the nth degree. In plain words, push it real hard so you see what happens when you burn lacquer. Know what to do wrong so you don't do it. You know.
Get soft in a hurry.
Oh yeah. You can you can buff a guitar today. The lacquer gets nice and warm and it will swell up and it will look beautiful. And you come in tomorrow and now you're going to see little lines. So you may have to buff 2 or 3 times to get them all down because if you overheat it, it swells just enough and it looks pretty, then it shrinks back down. Polyurethanes, I buff them up. They usually buff pretty good. They're pretty robust. The M-Tech works really well. Lacquer, and the nice thing with lacquer, it has a back door. You can fix that, but you always got to make sure when you do fills. I just did a guy had a Eric Clapton 45 got damaged in shipping. It took me 2 months to fix the scratches because you backfill. Gotta wait, because if you buff it too soon, you'll see the line again.
How about like a French polish finish?
Well, French polish is actually a way to apply finishes. Mike Wendt was here. Look for Mike Wendt. He just found something. What did he call that? It's a white bond finish, and it actually is, for those of you that don't have a spray booth, it makes a very nice finish. I have a video on white bond poly where I just use Minwax white bond poly, and that actually worked out fairly well. Read the instructions because you only have so many hours that you can reapply it that will cross-link and not leave that witness line. But buffing, the Dallas Auto Detail buffers, they explain all of the buffing pads. You're polishing, you aren't grinding. I think that's a big mistake a lot of people do. Won't you agree? Just too much pressure? Yeah, it's a light touch. It's a light touch.
Sorry, one other question. So you talk about the buffing methods, and then you talked about this. Do you use both of them?
Yes.
So
Yes.
You start with the buffing wheels?
Yep.
And then you go through those compounds?
Yep.
And then you finish with?
Yes. Yes. This really is really good for touch-up. I feel that they really, really help. I know Martin uses a lot of hand buffing for a little touch-up. It's really good. But remember, if your technique is not good, you'll figure that out real quick.
Are these used wet or dry?
Well, your compound is wet, so you don't add water. It's
But I mean, are these pads color coded? Is there have grid in them already?
No.
No. Okay.
No,
So
no.
you're applying compound to it.
right. Those little sponges, as they get wet, the beginning ones tend to stay a little stiffer. That blue one will get real soft.
Okay, so it's the texture of the sponge,
Right.
not grit in the sponge.
Yeah, this one here, SPTA, it's about $125, I think, on Amazon, and it actually comes with a kit of buffing pads. But that brand of buffing pad that I have going around, Cyclo, I like these the best out of all the ones. I can use them 3-4 times, and you can clean them in the sink, run them under water, squeeze them, then put them in a soapy bucket, rinse them, and then let them dry. But you can get, when they're shot, the hook and loop falls off.
And what actual polishing compound are you using with those?
Well, I am using the Groit's product, Meguiar's number 205, and Meguiar's swirl remover. They all read the label. If it says that it's you have a buffing compound, that's your coarser, polishes your finer. The swirl remover, and 3M Finesse, that's also a good buffing setup. They have what they call a hand glaze. So when I'm all done, we all know those microfiber. I'll take one of those foam pads, I'll put my microfiber on there, and then I'll just use that to clean it all off. And any excess buffing compound comes off real easy with a soft toothbrush and water.
Do you apply the compound to the buffing wheel or to?
I do it two ways. Okay, I'll put like 5 little blocks on the pad, and then I pad it onto the top.
And
Okay.
that stays wet enough by itself,
Yeah.
or you have to spritz it?
As you start using it, it's weird. As you're doing it, it'll come to a point where it kind of gets a little hazy, and all of a sudden, as the compound is evacuated, then you're going to see the gloss come up. But don't press. You aren't grinding, you're buffing, and keep it moving. Don't stay at one spot.
John, can you, speaking about procedure, all right, so you have the neck and the body separate, and you're hitting them on the buffing wheels with the various Mazurna deals. Okay, so now it's time to polish, but do you go ahead and assemble the neck and et cetera before you polish, or do you polish them individually?
I polish them individually, and on the necks, I just use a buffing wheel.
Okay.
Okay,
And
because
so-
a lot of times I like a satin neck. Now, if I do a 45, I do polish it, but because of the curvature, the soft cotton and what's the other one? You have a 205. Manzurna has a 205 and a 175. Those are the two I use on the neck that gloss them up.
So you're doing the final polish and then gluing the neck and attaching the bridge.
Right, and you might have to go back and do a
Fully
little,
polished.
when you're putting it back together, you might have to do a little touch-up buffing, but that's all. When you have it all nice and clean and you learn your buffing technique, you can make it look real nice and pretty when you're all done. And remember, when you're doing this, make sure you have a clean, soft pad on your bench. You don't want to put a bench rash when you're all done.
So one other question, for the buffing wheels, when you go through the different grits, like you start off with 3. When you're done with 3, do you just put on 4?
No, I rake it.
You rake it.
You rake it.
But you don't use a different wheel?
No.
You just rake it?
Yeah.
So that gets rid of most of what's
But
there?
yeah, when I'm done buffing, I have white cotton lint all over me. Yeah, it just takes it right off. All right, does that,
Pattern. We use the hand one, using a pattern. I've been told that it makes sense for me is to like go in a figure 8 sort
hey,
of pattern.
that's what I do.
So you don't get into a repetitive,
Right.
sort of unintentional.
Yeah, and when you do that, you're gonna do figure 8 this way, and then you're gonna go do figure 8 this way. So you wanna be as random as you can, because if you start putting a pattern down, you're gonna give yourself a problem. So make sure, do everything, okay? And be careful of the corners, because you can go through the corners. That's right.
John, I haven't done wet buffing in decades.
Okay.
I may revisit it, just out of curiosity
Yeah.
with your system. I do know from my own experience with hand buffing, you can really start digging yourself into a hole.
Yes.
And you feel you added scratches, then you try to get those out, it gets worse. In that situation, first of all, I think you need to let the lacquer cool down for
Oh, yeah.
a couple
Yeah.
days. And I would then just start by taking it back to the fine buffing wheel
Okay.
rather than trying to do more hand stuff.
Well, the new buffing pads that came out compared to the old foam buffing pads,
I remember the cotton.
yeah. Oh, the lamb's wool bonnets, yeah, they are.
Yeah, I haven't used that
No,
for years, so.
Yeah, same reason, because the very first guitar I built, I used the random orbital on it with the lamb's wool bonnets and all of that, and I never got the result.
Right.
These foam pads are an altogether different
Okay,
story.
I'm open-minded, I'll give it a try.
But
Couple
again,
other-
the technique is light.
Okay, couple other things, I think you really want to get your drop filling finished early on, because as soon as it gets heated up with a buffer, they want to shrink back.
Yep, yes.
So, get them done really early. And I think you need to really think about how perfect the finish has to be.
Right.
I attended a finishing seminar last year, I'm not gonna mention who presented it. And he talked about why he switched from lacquer to catalog finishing. And his reasons were, it doesn't check, and it doesn't yellow with it. It's exactly what I want my finishes to do.
Yeah, finishing, it's like ice cream. You like vanilla, he likes butter pecan. If I stress it, I can't stress it enough. It's your technique. Pay attention to the heat, because heat is your enemy. As a machinist, I can tell you right now, whenever you machine something, you're gonna put heat. You're either putting it in the work, you're putting it in your tool, or you're putting it in your chip. So you want the heat in your chip. So when you're using this, it's a light touch, constantly feel, because you'll feel if you're putting too much heat, speed, because these are adjustable. I generally use a mid-range speed. You would think, oh, I want to go faster. Well, faster builds up more heat. Slow, you're getting your heat into the sponge. So you got to find that area where you have the efficiency that the abrasive is doing its job. Let the abrasive do the work. You don't want the pad to do the work, you want the abrasive to do the work. The pad is there to work the abrasive. Okay?
Did you say that you're pushing your instrument an inch into your
Just
wheel?
about, yeah. You just want to go in here that you're breaking that circle. Okay? Feel the heat. That's going to tell you what you're doing. The coarser the material, the more heat you're going to do. So just play with a light touch.
Do you not want to get heat on your finish?
You don't want it to be warmer than slightly above room temperature. You're going to build up some heat, but you don't want it hot.
It's only a second between looking good and uh-oh.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the one thing you want to avoid is an AFM. Okay? You know what an AFM is? Oh, fuck. Okay? You don't want to do that. And Roger, and I said it earlier, the shinier it gets, the more the flaws show up. That's why I like to do as much drop filling on the first 2 coats as I can. If you think there's something there, put the drop on. Because like he said, when you're doing a final touch-up and you do a fill, I guarantee in a week you're gonna see that spot. So you really gotta let that cure. And air is your curing agent.
John, what was that resource, Dallas Auto
Detailers
Detail?
on YouTube.
What-
So,
Sorry, question about the, wet finish, or white bond finish. First off, what sort of fumes does it give off?
well, it's a mild, I think the base coat on that's mineral spirit, so you're gonna smell something like that. But come and see me later, I'll introduce you to Mike, he has a piece out there that I can show you. All right? So Roger failed to tell me it was time to quit.
No, you still got a minute.
Oh, I got a minute.
No, actually, it's 10:50, so we're over.
Okay. Yes.
So Justin,
I want to thank you all for coming and listening to me talk. I hope I sounded good. Hope I had a good time. Hope you had a good time. And if you see me, you got a question, I'll make up an answer.